Hi, and welcome to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. Today we're going to talk about Buzzsaw moments. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. My name is Kale Houser. Thank you for joining me tonight. And I do want to say thank you for being an active participant in all of my past guest speakers that I've had the pleasure to bring to you the last couple of episodes. It was quite a slew, and I was frankly going back and forth of whether to mix it up with more of just me talking to you or just do a straight kind of chunk of having these amazing guest speakers come. And honestly, I just couldn't resist bringing their thoughts and opinions and their stories to you so that you can get the most benefit from their varied experiences that are different than mine. Because that is truly how we learn, is not just from one person, although every person has something we can learn from, but from exposing ourselves to a variety of different experiences and thought patterns and mindsets and all those types of things. I know that from each of them, there was at least like 30 different things that you could learn from them. And that if you were paying attention, you could actively implement into your life to positively affect, your health, your mindset, your story, your business, your tactics of how you relate to people, how you view leadership, all kinds of different things. And I just want to say I'm so thankful to my guests that have been willing to donate their time and be a guest and really lend that expertise to my audience. So I trust that you have found that beneficial. They are certainly not the last of the guest speakers that I'll have, but I think for a little while at least, we'll get back to a little bit more of this tactical level leadership advice, tips, mentoring, whatever you want to call this. But I hope it helps you in your journey, whatever situation you're finding yourself in. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about the buzzsaw moments in your life, specifically how it relates to in your business, in these situations and these scenarios that you're walking along, you're doing your thing, you've got your routine down and everything's, bright and sunny. You've got really nothing going on that's, maybe coming into your world and distracting you, or maybe you've got 1,000 things that are coming into your world and causing these distractions and anxiety and uncertainty. But then we've kind of all had these moments, right, where we're going and we turn this corner and then just boom, right? We run right into this buzzsaw, like the classic horror movie kind of thing where they turn a corner and then whack, right? They get right in the head with an axe or with a saw blade or whatever it is. Think of grotesque horror movie type endings to people. But these metaphorical buzzsaw moments that we run into. And I got to thinking like, man, I've had some pretty significant ones in my life that really altered in some form or fashion, whether it be my mindset and how I thought of things or like legitimately altered my path that I was on. And I'd certainly shared with before, but it's been quite a few episodes back about one of the major defining moments of when I had frozen up. When I was in the Air Force, stationed at Cannon Air Force Base, we were doing this big exercise, just local, but we were setting up tents like we were deployed and all that kind of stuff. And it was coming to night, and we were supposed to come back in the morning and do some launches. And our illustrious commander at the time, who I've talked about before, and all of his shining qualities, said, "All right, everybody," because I was pseudo in charge of this exercise, even though he was really in charge. He goes, "All right, send everyone home to go get their gear, and we're spending the night out here," right? And I'm like, oh my gosh. And it caught me so flat-footed. That was just me walking along. Everyone was under this assumption that we were just setting up the tents as the exercise and, making sure everyone knew how to set up tents in a deployed environment or in deployed tents and things. But then we were going to come back for very good reasons, get a good night's sleep before we start launching aircraft in the morning, right? There's no reason to accept that inherent risk of, people not sleeping well, not, having the things they need to be fresh in the morning and launch aircraft safely versus the higher risk environment of a deployed scenario where you accept those risks. Anyway, the commander, caught me completely flat-footed to where I was essentially like, oh, my brain just went brrr, right? Like that, do not compute. The buzzsaw chopped right in half. And fortunately, to his infinite credit, I had a captain that worked with me and for me at that time that stepped in just smooth as glass and kind of helped diffuse that whole situation and was able to speak that logic into our commander to avoid that very, not only unpleasant situation, but also potentially like legitimately dangerous situation if it went down the road in worst case scenario. And that was a very defining moment of me of really self-analyzing to stop kind of going through my military career just kind of, whatever, da-da-da-da-da, instead of being more purposeful, having an intent about it and how I approach things, including things like that exercise or when I would deploy of, all right, this is the plan, this is what I'm doing, and having those things in place to where I had a place that I could essentially defend my position from, if that makes sense. And then another one real recently that came up, and it was between Liz and I, we were discussing, if we were going to invest some of our financial resources into going to this training later this year, and we were going through this kind of, as I would hope most married couples do, and certainly if you have business partners that you do, this kind of logical discussion of, hey, we've got this opportunity coming up. It is going to be a significant amount of money, but these are the potential ORI on that money. It may be tangible, maybe intangible type of ROI, whether it be learning or things of that nature, contacts. But in my mind, we were going through this logical process of discussing, like, is this the right choice for us? Is the right timing? Do we want to, invest our time to go travel to that, conference and do that training while essentially it takes you out of the business, right? Out of your business and being able to actively work on it for that good chunk of time. And then Liz just had made a comment that caught me so off guard. And it was one of these buzzsaw moments that it really caused this disconnect because I hadn't anticipated it, and it was so what I would consider out of left field for the context of this discussion that it kind of threw the whole thing in helter-skelter, and we won't get too far into that, but you could probably kind of allude of how the rest of the conversation went. But then I started thinking back, because that was more the spur of this of like, wow, what other points in my career, in my life have I had these? And two popped up that I really want to share with you. Because I think they're very illustrative of a lot of commonalities that happen to people, a lot of common situations that happen to people. And one of them was I was a younger man. Liz and I had been married for just a couple years at this point. We were living in the small town where we grew up and went to high school and stuff. And I had this job. I was working at an alternator and starter repair shop, like refurbish shop in our town. And they're really good. Like, they were known, and I'm pretty sure now they're like one of the number one in the country and all this kind of stuff. And it was, a small family-run business. It was like the dad was the owner. The one son was my direct boss. We worked the front counter together, and then the other son was like one of the outside salesmen, and then another son was doing something else with the business I didn't know about. And then, of course, right, like the girlfriend of my boss was in the finance department, all this kind of. So it was a very small, tight-knit community of there. And I went into the job. I really enjoyed it. It was a good culture. We had fun. We were able to laugh while getting stuff done. And, we had our inside jokes. You're a young guy, didn't pay the best in the planet, but it provided for Liz and I. And I remember one day essentially getting sent home early. And I'm like, what? And I got kind of pissed off. Like, wait a minute, what? It's a full-time job. I'm supposed to be working my 40 hours a week. And my supervisor, my boss, who's the son of the owner, kind of says, well, essentially, I don't remember exactly what he said, but essentially, like, we're not obligated to give you 40 hours, And it was one of those moments, like, at first you go through that kind of pissed off moment, like, what are you talking about? That's my money. I need that money to pay my bills. We were essentially young and broke, right? We had stuff that we wanted to do, and every dollar counted for us at that phase of our marriage. And I went through that initial kind of shock of like, oh no, my paycheck's going to be, however many dollars short for those missed hours this coming pay period. But then it was one of those moments that was a turning point for me in my thinking about jobs and employment of, man, they're right. Like, they don't owe me anything. I have no right to that 40 hours that I'm, in my mind, I had just come to expect. And it was really kind of one of those moments of turning that I transitioned from looking, what do people owe me by, whether by unofficial obligation or just agreement versus why am I here and what is this benefiting from me and how can it kind of be taken away? And that was something I think I carried with me and was very beneficial as I went into my military career, with the right attitude of, I'm not going into this for a job per se, that, the military owes me this money or these benefits, versus I am serving at the military, at the Air Force's leisure, for as long as I am beneficial to them, and it's mutually beneficial, right? Because at some point we can both walk away after I've met commitments and all that kind of thing. But it helped me change my mindset a little bit, instead of so much of, me focused like I'm owed this is my right, when in reality I have no claim to the resources of other people. And it helped me in my military career kind of have that attitude, because I found that time and again in other people that didn't have that attitude. Yeah, sure, they joined, the military in this specific instance for, to serve their country and things, but there were always those ancillary, I came here to get my GI Bill and get my education benefits. And there was this a little bit, I don't know if entitlement is the right word, but this definite expectation of the Air Force owed them something for their time, when that in reality is not at all what the military is there for, right? The military is there for us to serve as part of serving our country and our community. And then the last one that was a huge turning point for Liz and I in our life is, I dropped out. Liz had graduated college, and I had dropped out halfway through because it was just, we couldn't afford it. We went back to work, and we were kind of hopping around, and I'm like, man, I'd always wanted to be a pilot and become a commercial pilot. And so through a friend that was going through this flight school, kind of re-piqued that interest, and we ended up going to a flight school down in New Mexico and moving, like Liz and I, before we had kids, moved from Washington to New Mexico, set up, went through our semester, got my private pilot's license, and it was wicked expensive, I'll be honest. But the whole premise of this flight school was put on through Mesa Airlines, and they're no longer doing it as far as I'm aware, that you would go through their program, and they would literally take somebody with 0 hours. Like, yep, you just got a desire to fly, 0 hours. We're going to put you in this plane. We're going to take you all the way through your private, your instrument, your commercial, your ATP, and you'd graduate with like roughly 300-ish hours of flight time, but you'd have all your ratings. And their guarantee was, it was essentially like, officially it was, we guarantee you an interview with Mesa Airlines to become a first officer and then start flying the regional airlines to build your career hours. But it was really, as long as you weren't, kind of a dirtbag with a reputation coming out of the school, because it was all just for Mesa Airlines, then they would hire you on. It was a pretty good deal for that track, and especially being younger and not having any obligations other than just Liz and I and something to do for a career-wise. But it was fascinating. So this would have been in like 2001, 2002 timeframe. They had a similar deal for instructors. So if you already had, your CFI ratings to instruct in small aircraft, you could come and teach at the school for a year, and then they would extend you the same opportunity to, the opportunity to interview. But it was essentially, as long as you weren't a jerk instructor that everyone hated, then they would hire you on. Well, I'll never forget this. I had two specific instructors that they were great. They were phenomenal. They were perfect instructors in the cockpit. They were calm. They were very, informative in how they taught. And I'm like, yeah, these dudes they're amazing. Especially as my first experience in the cockpit in that sense. And I'll never forget, they came back, because they were at the end of their year when I finished my first semester, because we got partnered with a local community college to be an academic program as well. But they go and they do their interviews, and Mesa Airlines didn't hire them. Neither of these two guys. Actually, and I think they were the only two that went up at that time for interviews of the instructor corps. And neither of them got hired. I'm going, whoa. And this was like this. You could feel the ripples throughout the whole school, right? Because we were all, as students, going for this. This was our career path, that we were on. And I remember thinking, wow. So at the time, it was going to be, another year and a half, like 4 or 5 more semesters to finish, to go through the whole program, get all my ratings. I had just finished getting my private license. And it was going to cost like $50,000 more, but beyond what I had already put in the private session, $50,000 more to continue and graduate, not including housing costs. We're talking just tuition and flight time and, gas and instructor time and all that. And I remember thinking, man, I'm going to graduate here with over $50,000 in debt, and I'm going to be working at Home Depot, or I'm going to be working at some just random retail job because the airlines aren't hiring. And what I'd failed to understand and take into account was 2011. Well, what happened in 2011 and then 2002 was the airline industry was in their massive shock from 9/11, and the airline industry and the pilot industry specifically was still in full-blown furlough mode, people getting laid off, right? So there was this unfortunate bad timing on my desires of wanting to be an airline pilot, but also at the same time, there's literally thousands of seasoned pilots, commercial pilots, got laid off left and right, and they're all waiting to get back. And the reality is there's no way any airline is going to take a 300-hour brand new, never been in, they got to teach me everything, versus a furloughed guy that they can get on the cheap because he's out of work, that has, 5,000 hours or 10,000 hours, whatever that is. And it was really one of those turning moments. Again, a lesson learned of how do I when I go into something, how do I do a little bit of market research and figure out, is this even viable? Is there an opportunity there for me in the future? Or should I choose to continue down this path? And it was one of those real defining moments in my life of just kind of getting me out of, again, similar to walking around my Air Force career, even though I guess you could argue it didn't take that much, or it didn't take a hold that much, of stop just living in the moment all the time and having a little bit of a plan and an approach to being purposeful in our planning and future. But the real intent of this is that these moments are going to happen to you. And if you run your own business, if you are a business owner, they are going to happen to you. And more than likely, they already have. And you could probably sit there and think about 20 different buzzsaw moments where you've been caught off guard, or it was worse than you expected, or something of that nature that was just that shock to your system, like running into a buzzsaw. Hopefully, if you're listening to this, it didn't kill you, it didn't, cause you to go bankrupt or anything of that nature. But the reason that I'm talking to you about this is to give you that opportunity to kind of keep your eyes open, to give you that opportunity to realize that it's essentially inevitable that it will happen if it hasn't happened to you yet. But how you prepare for those moments, especially mentally and mindset, is the difference maker. If you have the ability to kind of think through these various situations of, okay, what if this happens and what if this happens? And I'm not saying be obsessed with the negative or doom and gloom or constantly on guard, but you need to have kind of a basic understanding and fortitude, as well as a resiliency of when these things happen and how you respond to them. So maybe choose and do those affirmations at night. Say, hey, if this business deal that I'm about to go into goes south, this is how I'm going to react to it. Is like, okay, I'd love to do that thing, but if it doesn't work out, I'm going to shoot for this target over here instead, or I'm going to learn these lessons specifically about, whatever that situation is, or if there's business partners or things involved that you can glean that information from, because you can learn from it. And that really is, right, the intent of the lesson. Or on the other hand, is you can crumble. You can succumb to the buzzsaw going straight through your skull and splitting you in half, and then it's unrecoverable. And that's really obviously not what we want. And I'm hoping that these episodes are helping you in that time. So the point being is, now is the time to mentally prepare, do things to help yourself get more resilient. And if you find or you realize that in the past you've reacted poorly to those situations, or overreacted, or made them worse, heaven forbid, no one's guilty of that, right? Raise your hand. Then now's the time to really start processing that and thinking through those scenarios and how you can better respond to those. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned a couple of things from my little stories there, that they weren't too obscure or rambling in nature. Thank you so much again for joining me. Thank you for being willing to support the channel. Likes, comments, subscribes. That would be fantastic. And we'll talk to you soon. No matter where you're at in the world, have a fantastic afternoon. Bye.